Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on Friday the 18th of December, ahead of the last fight card of the last UFC fight card of the year. We'll be talking about Rising next week, but then we got a bit of a break between UFC fight cards, so we're going to do some more interesting stuff then. And yeah, it's a pretty good card. We got Geoff Neal versus Stephen Thompson in the main event, and then a load of other cool stuff down the card. But the big news this week, of course, is that Jake Paul wants to fight Conor McGregor, and Dana White said, I might let him fight Amanda Nunes in a boxing match, and idiots were like, yeah. It was much like LeBron versus Colby, and how people were like, oh, Michelle Waterson would beat LeBron James in a fight. Oh my god. If you're actually beguiled by this matchup, let me just clear it up for you. Jake Paul is 40 pounds heavier than Amanda Nunes and like half a foot taller. And if there's one thing he's shown in his boxing matches, is that he will happily duck into a clinch if you start throwing right hands at him. Amanda Nunes is not knocking Jake Paul out. It would go the distance. Everyone would be trying to claim like a moral victory, and everyone would feel dirty and disgusted. Or Jake Paul might knock her out and then, just end MMA instantly. The other news this week, of course, was that Bellator managed to pick up Yoel Romero and my big, thick, juicy boy Rumble, who was teasing a comeback forever, and then presumably went, no, I don't want to do USADA again. I mean, if you saw Rumble when he was bodybuilding, he quit MMA, and like 2 months later, he was 300 pounds and jacked. So, about that. But the really interesting thing is that they've asked Yoel Romero to compete at light heavyweight for reasons unknown to everyone else. Brackets, Gegard Mousasi doesn't want to fight someone who's not a welterweight. But anyway, let's talk about these upcoming fights. 13 fights from the Apex Center, 4 or 5 of them pretty good. The rest of them, people that, they'll do. I don't know Tafon and Chukwi or Jamie Pickett, but I'm sure they can put on a good fight. Darren Wynn's back to continue being too short for the weight class. Actually, they've got it listed as a 195-pound fight here, so that's very strange. But then there was a cancellation on that. Anyway, we're not here to talk about him, or how 4 of the fighters on this card originally have been pulled off due to COVID-19 tests. What we are going to talk about is Stephen Thompson versus Geoff Neal. If you are a Patreon boy, there is a big Patreon piece up, the tactical guide to Geoff Neal versus Stephen Thompson. I'll touch on some of the same stuff here, but it's good to go and read that because it's probably a better laid out version of my thoughts. And there's an audio track and all that stuff for the people who don't like looking at the letters. But I think this is a fascinating matchup because Geoff Neal is he's burst onto the scene he's been in the UFC about 2 years. He was in the UFC about 2 years, and then he had a year off just now. But in the 2 years that he was fighting in the UFC, sparked 4 dudes and beat up Bilal Muhammad. Just most recently stopped Mike Perry, which is a great name to stop because as much as we all think Mike Perry's a meme fighter and deeply, deeply flawed, that is the only knockout loss on Perry's record. And you can remember his nose being spread all over his face by Vicente Luque and other scary people like that. So huge feather in Geoff Neal's cap that he's got that on his record. But if you look at him, it's a lot of the same stuff that southpaw fighters tend to do. Left straight, left round kick. Doesn't really go to the body with the left round kick. He's very much a headhunter. And as I said in the article, the southpaw double attack doesn't just stop working at a certain level. It's always going to be a threat, and the more explosive and fast the guy applying it is, the more of an issue it is. But to sum him up very, very quickly, there's a lot more on that article, but to sum him up quickly, he does 2 really interesting things. One, he'll bounce around the ring on the back foot, and he'll go between southpaw and feet level, and he'll just bounce in and out like that, and make this big distance between him and the opponent. And they'll step into close, and he'll step in out of his feet parallel stance into his southpaw stance and throw in a big left straight with his head offline and intercept them with an intercepting counter. And that's how he's hurt a lot of dudes. He hurt Nico Price like that. He hurt Frank Camacho numerous times like that. And then the high kick against Mike Perry came off the back foot as well. So that's the one half of his game. But what he prefers doing, what he did a lot more on the regional scene, is walking guys down. And if you notice, when he walks guys down, he gets a lot closer before he throws. He sets up these huge distances when he's fighting off the back foot and counter fighting, and then when he's going forward, he's not giving it. He doesn't want to give the opponent any chance to get ahead of him. So he really closes down the distance, and he fights quite square on to begin with, and he has his shoulders almost square, and he gets really, really close, so that when he throws his left straight, he's not turning his full body into it, but it does come out much quicker, or slightly quicker. It's like Roy Jones used to throw that right hand lead all the time, but he also used to fight from almost square, so the right hand lead was more of an arm punch, really, but it got there so quick. There's a lot of that in Neal. Like, if you watch him against Bilal Muhammad, bit against Brian Camozzi, definitely against Kevin Holland, he's trying to walk him down, and he's very square on. And the Kevin Holland fight, which, it's I'm always careful because, if two guys meet on the regional scene and then 3 years later you're talking about one of them, you know that they've gotten better in that time. They've been able to train more of their time. They've had, they've been seasoned and they fought better competition. But that Kevin Holland fight, if you watch it, is such a brilliant demonstration of the flaws in Geoff Neal, because Kevin Holland just sidekicks the shit out of him all day, and it wins Neal. And even the punches and takedowns that Kevin Holland lands, he does them by picking up his knee and gliding in like he's going to sidekick, and then he'll just duck in on the hips or throw a right hand, and that's how he knocks him out in the end, or TKOs him. Raises his left knee, slides in, shoots the right hand down the center while Geoff Neal's crunching over ready for the body shot. It is a big problem for Neal. He doesn't really have an answer to the body shots. Body shots generally, not even just the sidekick. If you watch his fight with Bilal Muhammad, he starts out by, when Bilal Muhammad ducks in to hit his body, he just tries to punch back. And then the more Bilal Muhammad does it, the more he's just sort of crunching over and not firing back. Which is, I said this in the article, but it's kind of counterintuitive, because the last thing you want to do against someone who's got a power and speed edge on you is start getting in really close to hit their body with your hands. But the more Bilal Muhammad did it, the less Geoff Neal punched back. It was very strange. But the reason that I like the sidekick, and I'm just going to extend this to all other straight kicks against Geoff Neal, is that his body's square as he's moving in. He really wants to close that range down so that he can work. And, on the off chance he throws up the high kick instead of trying to get closer, it also goes down the center and hits him in the body. And you could just keep pushing him back. And the effects of it on his gas were very obvious in the Holland fight. But this is the thing. When I said that, I thought, oh, that's an interesting fight for Stephen Thompson. One of the guys we most associate with the sidekick in MMA. However, I don't know if it is, because Stephen Thompson, one thing I will say about him is that he's very loath to go, even if he sees an opportunity that he could ruthlessly exploit, if it doesn't conform to what he's doing already, he won't do it. He's very much, this is my comfort zone, this is what I do. I might have had amazing success with that side kick there, or the front kick to the body, or something like that. But I really like the 1-2 and darting out the side door. That's my main game. And even then, the side kick that Thompson uses most often is the defensive side kick, or the D side, which comes straight out of the stance. If you watch that Kevin Holland fight, he's leaping up into these side kicks, really just stomping through Geoff Neal's gut. Yeah, I can see Thompson annoying him with the odd defensive side kick and using that to set up the round kick. That's the other thing. Thompson's lead leg kicking game tends to come from his southpaw stance, which means he'd switch to closed guard, which makes side kicking a little bit trickier to begin with, but also means that rather than the hook kick, which is what Kevin Holland was throwing up a lot, he'd probably be throwing up that little turnover round kick that he did against Johnny Hendricks. It's compelling, but Thompson's also been good with rear-handed straights to the body. He's not a great body hitter, but he does go up and down, particularly with the left or right straight to the body, depending on what stance he's in. His rear hand, the reverse punch. And honestly, it seems like Geoff Neal, his best connections tend to be when the guy comes after him, when he takes off the pressure. And he tends to look worse when he's following guys around the ring. And he's been doing it against guys who are much, much worse at staying disciplined about range and distance and ring position than Thompson. I think Neal's task here is trying to get Thompson to stick around in range long enough to hit. That's the other thing that I forgot to mention, the sidekick thing. Don't forget that Thompson's most recent knockout loss against Anthony Pettis came off a poorly judged sidekick that just slid off Pettis' body, and then Pettis Superman punched him in the head. So ideally, I mean, you'd love to see him just ruthlessly pounding the body with side kicks and circling off. But yeah, it just does not. I can see him not doing that, is what I'm saying. But for Neal, I think this is a great fight to start using the right hook. You know, he's got a very underrated right hook. He uses it from time to time as like an intercepting counter, but also in combination. When I was doing that piece, that podcast I did catching up on Geoff Neal, I talked about how he's like a bomb, sort of combination puncher where all the focus is on his left hand and his right hand doesn't really do much. But when he loads up his right hand just for the one punch, it looks pretty good. I think using the right hook to end combinations or to end exchanges, because he's probably going to get beaten to the punch if he's having to follow Thompson around. You know, cover, throw the right hook back, throw a left low kick on the end of it or a left high kick. Really, like, anyone who's fighting Thompson, the blueprint's already there. It's not caused like a huge loss yet, but Jorge Masvidal, Vicente Luque, people like that have all had success with the same methods, have all had success with like parts of the same stuff. Kick his legs, back him towards the cage, hit his body. You know, it's attacking his movement more than anything. And that's the thing, like, the more difficult it is to hit someone, the more you tend to bank on every shot. You know, you're like, well, I might not get another chance, better knock his head off. And that just makes it easier for him to move his head and slide out the side door. What you really need to be doing is trying to corner him against the fence as much as possible, kicking his legs whenever they're close enough, hitting his body whenever he's close enough, because those are the things that make it harder for him to move in the long run. If you watch that first round with Vicente Luque, because we all remember that fight as an ass-kicking, but the first round, Thompson's really in a lot of trouble. Vicente Luque's doing step-up low kicks every time Thompson's close enough. He corners him a few times, and Thompson's ducking into clinches, picking up single legs, throwing winging overhands, doing things that Thompson doesn't normally do because he wants to get Luque off him. And it's like the start of the second round, he lands a good, stiff, rear-handed straight while Luke's on one leg, and it all just sort of goes downhill from there for Luque. So yeah, obviously, you know, if you get blindly into low kicking, you'll end up in the Daniel Pineda situation where you get punched in the face on one leg, and that can ruin your night. But I think legs, body, cage position, most important things. Return on, if you're late to an exchange, return with the right hook and throw the left leg on the end. But again, like, all of that, talk about it more in the tactical guide to Neal versus Thompson. You can go read that if you're a Patreon boy. It's a damn good fight, and it's one that I've been waiting for a little while. And last week I was like, oh, that's the end of the fights for the year, but I forgot about this. It's such a good little scrap. And what I basically rounded off the article saying was that if Stephen Thompson beats Geoff Neal, this is a great way for him to start working his way back into the title picture, because he was sort of exiled after Woodley 2. And he's had a couple of losses in that time too. But whereas if Neal wins and does it impressively, or at least convincingly, expect them to strap a rocket to him and ride him to the moon. Because Stephen Thompson is the last person you should want to fight if you're a welterweight. You know, the guys in the title picture, like, I mean, Jorge Masvidal just fought for the title, but Stephen Thompson had made him look an absolute fool when they fought. He's a very, very difficult man. And you're either going to, even if you have your moments, he's probably going to make you look silly over the long run. Like, Vicente Luque did fine for the first round. He did really well for the first round. But we all just remembered Thompson dancing all around him and making him look silly. I think that's what's quite interesting about Stephen Thompson too. Like, he is not a big action fighter. He's not a huge knockout artist. But he's still got this, like, casual appeal. People really like it. I think it's kind of like the Machida thing, where you've got an old school karate man or an old school, like, American kickboxer or something like that. Someone with a style out of time that they've made work. So become a Patreon boy, read the article. It's more eloquent than what I'm saying now. What do we got on the rest of this card then? Oh, Jose Aldo versus Marlon Vera. That's a pretty interesting fight to me. Marlon Vera obviously riding high off a win that, you know, as someone who objectively looks at fights, you're kind of like, yeah, no, it's not really a massive win. The guy's ankle gave out or whatever when you low kicked him. But equally, I'm also like, haha, sorry, Sean O'Malley, no rematch for you. Big Vera fan, and he's another one like Charles Oliveira, where that little break of fighting objectively worse opposition, or, you know, weaker opposition, actually seemed to help him an awful lot. You know, he lost to Douglas de Andrade, and then he fought like Luigi Buran, Guido Canetti, Frankie Sainz is probably the best one on there. Nohelin Hernandez, Andre Ewell, all like okay guys, but not great guys. Then he fought Song Yadong, competitive, controversial decision, and then Sean O'Malley. He's looked good in both of those. While he's not like smoking them like he did the previous 6, it still tells you that he wasn't beating up lesser competition was not all that he could do. He was genuinely improving while doing that. I think he's an interesting character because he's working with Jason Pereira, who is one of the more intriguing coaches in MMA at the moment. I haven't watched his instructional yet for BJJ Fanatics, which I will do during my supermarket sweep. But people are asking about Mackenzie Dern last week, and I didn't really touch on it because I thought it was a pretty sloppy fight. But one thing that I did notice was that she was using the jab and the dipping jab really well to close distance. It's just that the rest of what she was doing was rubbish. Like, he's going, yeah, you're seeing the right hand coming after your jab. Why don't you duck it and do a takedown? And she'd duck the right hand and then go, oh, and then sort of run after the takedown after whatever her name was had reset position. Or like she'd throw 2 nice jabs or a jab and a dipping jab to follow up and cover some distance and then just throw a spastic straight arm right hand, like swing it in and almost break her own elbow doing it. It's crazy how useful the jab can be in terms of like moving people around as a counter and things like that. Like when she landed the jab, it looked good and setting stuff up. But if you don't work on the other stuff, you just got like a great jab and crap everything else. It's really weird to look at. But yes, Perillo really good at making guys decent jabbers. And he's done an okay job with Vera. Vera's hands and head movement and defense are always sort of like the letdown. What he really is great at is working from the clinch and beating people up in that tighter range that is so underused in MMA. And, interestingly enough, one of the few people who does it well is Petr Yan, who's just fought Jose Aldo. But, it's like Matt Brown, Marlon Vera. There's really not a lot of them. Occasionally Overeem. But it's such a good, you can really limit the opponent's striking ability by leaning on them and moving their weight around or moving your weight around on them. And you've got a hold of them so they can't go anywhere. You've taken out all the, because footwork is something that Vera struggles with too. You've taken out all the speed and reactions and stuff, and you've made it into a clinch fight, but you're still landing strikes. There are guys out there like Paul Felder's another great one, who hit really hard, are fantastic strikers in that sense, but they lack in areas like the movement and the cutting the cage or drawing people on or being fast enough on the outside. And the moment that you get hold of someone, it eliminates all of that difficult stuff, and you can just make them feel your power and your strength. And still so underused in the MMA, in like modern MMA. And Vera's very good at it because he was doing it to Song Yadong, who's a very strong wrestler. It is a completely different game, striking on the inside, to just straight wrestling. And he's fighting Jose Aldo. And Jose Aldo, like, obviously, the Petr Yan fight, it's a very strange spot we're in with Jose Aldo, because he's only 34, but he has a lot of miles on the, I was going to say the tank, on the clock or whatever it is. But, while he's losing, and he's on a 3-fight trot now that he's not won, he's not looking bad. He's not, like, he's not Jose Aldo untouchable as he was back in the day, but people around him have got better and he's slowed down a bit, and he's still competitive with them. We're only a couple of fights removed from him blowing out Jeremy Stevens and Renato Moicano back-to-back at featherweight and just being like, yeah, I'm sort of just fighting for fun now. I've had that fight with Volkanovski, which was close and competitive. He lost, but, he never looked like he was in serious trouble. Marlon Moraes, he had Moraes in serious trouble. And a lot of people felt that he won that fight, and they gave him a title shot off that, but it was cancelled, sadly. And then he fought again for the title against Petr Yan, and Petr Yan stopped him, but it took him 5 rounds, and it's Petr Yan. He stops everyone. And, people... It's sad to see people you admire, like, get stopped or not be what they were, but he's still pretty bloody close to what he was. I think acting like this is like Chuck Liddell or someone like that, it's just pointless, And I could absolutely see him winning this fight because Marlon Vera, his ways of closing the distance aren't terrific. Aldo is very strong in the clinch anyway. I mean, Petr Yan, one of the best clinch strikers in MMA, still had a lot of trouble with Aldo there. And Marlon Vera, like, I can see him coming in behind the jab and Aldo slipping, throwing the uppercut and the left hook and those horrible counter combinations that he tries to take people's heads off with. I can see Marlon Vera trying to come in behind the front kicks and Aldo parrying it and coming back with low kicks. he's so polished on the feet, and Marlon Vera's ways of getting in aren't that polished. And then, of course, you've got the issue that if you do get inside, you're dealing with one of the best anti-wrestlers in MMA history. If you don't have the threat of the trip, which again was a big part of that fight with Yudong, you know, he was striking from the clinch, but he was also threatening those short trips and things to mix things up and create openings to strike. If you don't have the threat of that, if you're not convincing there, you know, it's a lot more difficult to strike anyway. So a fascinating little one here, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Aldo pulls it off. But I don't say it enough, so if you're in doubt, the official position of the Fights Gone By podcast is if you don't think Jose Aldo is one of the greatest fighters of all time, go fuck yourself. So what else? Oh, we're into meme fights now. Michelle Pereira versus Chaos Williams. Michelle Pereira, I thought his last fight, I almost wrote something on it because I thought he actually looked, he was wild and he did his weird shit, but he also showed you sort of like what he could do when he's not just being a dickhead. He's doing that thing where he'd throw some wild strikes or whatever, back off, circle the cage, and as the guy closed in to get him, he'd hit him with a good left straight from southpaw or a good right straight from orthodox, walking people onto counters and stuff like that. And he really put the fear of God in that lad. The Russian dude, whatever his name was, the guy slapped him at the weigh-ins. Michelle Pereira is like licking his hands and showing him and being like, "I'm going to slap you in a second." But I thought, probably, if you could get that ratio right, I think he could be a real force in the division. But if he just goes full spastic, the kind that didn't even allow him to finish Diego Sanchez. I mean, he should have blown Diego Sanchez out of the water. And I know that obviously there was a DQ in that fight, but Diego Sanchez shouldn't have made it one round with this dude if he was fighting well. But talking of not going one round, I mean, Chaos Williams, and he's like his combined time in the UFC in his two fights has been less than a minute. He sparked, what was the first lad's name? Moreno, in something like 20 seconds. And then just most recently he fought Al Hassan. And Al Hassan has been like, I'll explode on people in under a minute and get the knockout. And for a while I was like, is Al Hassan good or just catching people by surprise? And it turns out he's not actually that good. He just does catch people by surprise. But he comes out, throws a right low kick, and Chaos Williams just hits him in the face on one leg, starches him like completely stiff. So yeah, very meme-tastic fight. What more could you want? I will say, Chaos Williams' nickname is the Ox Fighter, and I see dudes with the nickname the Ox or stuff like that all the time. They're like, do you know what an ox is, mate? An ox is a bull. They've cut the nads off so that it's more compliant. Actually, this gives me a chance to moan about Masayama a little bit. Masayama, the karate bullfighter, he's supposed to have fought 50 bulls. The only footage of it is him beating up an old ox that doesn't want to fight back because it's got no... it's completely broken as an animal. It's just like, oh, leave me alone. And he's karate chopping it in the neck. But that shit works, you just advertise that to people and then they're like, oh, he's the god hand, Masayama. It's crazy because he was basically not a con man, but he was a circus strongman for a while, and he believed heavily in what he called, his words, monkey business. And despite all these legends building up around him, he did a 100-man kumite or whatever, which people now do, Francisco Filho did the 100-man kumite. All these legit fighters that come out based on the Masayama myth legacy, and then dudes who actually hung out with Oyama for years were like, oh, I never ever saw him spar ever. So he's an interesting figure. I'll do some karate history stuff in the interim between some of these events, but I suppose ultimately a force for good, even if it was fake bollocks, a lot of it. But not much more to say about that fight. I don't know what I expect to happen because I've not really seen Chaos Williams go past 20 seconds against good opposition. And Michelle Pereira can turn up in many different forms. He moves in mysterious ways. But this is one that I didn't even know was happening. Marlon Moraes versus Rob Font. Now, Rob Font, he's been away for a while, I think. He smoked Thomas Almeida. That was exciting. Lost to Rafael Sansa on the scorecards. Beat Sergio Pettis, sent him back into Bellator, mate. But that was back in December 2018. He fought Ricky Simone in 2019, December 2019. So he's been out a full year again. A year between his last two fights and then a year between this one too. Bloody hell. I mean, he had a couple of cancellations in there, but he was booked to fight Cody Stamen. He's booked to fight Cody Stamen and John Lineker, so good guys. But yeah, Marlon Moraes, big step up for him. Font, one of the nicest jabs in MMA at the moment. Really slick stuff. Marlon Moraes, obviously, not the sort of guy that you want to start. Marlon Moraes is the kind of guy that you want to be in the second round, having established your jab, and then you'll take him apart. But you don't want to be in the first round trying to establish your jab, because every time you do, he's going to swing back and try and take your head off. Moraes' last one was against Corey Sandhagen. Sandhagen did a great job of just balancing that, walking that line, getting into jab, but also being away for the counter, feinting lots to get him swinging at air or holding back, and then following up with like a, he'd feint, he'd go orthodox, he'd double his right hand, step through into southpaw and kick him in the body with the left leg, worked really well. I think Sandhagen did a great job of getting Moraes moving and throwing at air, and I think if Rob Font can do that, he's in with a great chance here, because Moraes throws so much into every strike, and even if he's not going to tire himself out, he'll start holding back and you can start digging in with harder shots. If Rob Font comes out and is scared by the counters, or just goes straight at him without establishing the jab and calming Moraes down first, I think he's got a very hard night's work in for him. Or he's in for a hard night's work. That's the English way of saying that. What else we got? Gillian Roberts versus Talia Santos. I like Gillian Roberts. She's all right. Marcin Tybura versus Greg Hardy. A couple of big fat bums going to swing like big fat bums. But still, top 20 big fat bums? Do not care. Not giving that attention. I mean, I wrote an article about Marcin Tybura back in the day because I had to, because they main evented a card with nothing else on with him. And I hated it. And Greg Hardy, what more do you need to know? He's a big, explosive guy who gasses out and really just shows how bad MMA heavyweights are. But Anthony Pettis versus Alex Morono, that's a fun little fight. I mean, Morono seems like a bit of a softball for Pettis, given the level of competition Pettis has been fighting, and this is the last one on his contract. So maybe they're being nice and just letting him off. Go. He's been talking about going to Bellator, and I've heard rumours that a lot of Duke Rufus's boys are going to Bellator after Sergio did. But that'd be very nice if they're just giving him this and being like, there you go, off to Bellator. Pani Kianzad, who I've never heard of, is taking on Sijara Eubanks, who obviously is the queen. Carl Roberson's back, Darren Wynn. Yeah, we've done all this. So yeah, not a bad card. We're getting close to the wire now, so I'll just upload this. I won't bother doing any questions today. But if you want to get in on the Patreon, read the tactical guide to Neal versus Stephen Thompson, do that. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Kevin Holland's run-up sidekick, bless.